All right, so the last thing we're going to cover in this lecture series is how do we assess personality. Now, one thing that's really, really important is that, we need to quantify what personality is. And so, of course, any sort of psychological test is going to look at things like abilities, aptitudes, or interests, or personality if it's a personality test. And it's looking at a systematically obtained sample of behavior, trying to look at this, in a person. We want psychological tests to achieve at least two basic goals. One is that it's going to accurately and consistently reflect a person's characteristic on some dimension, whatever dimension it is that you're trying to test. And second of all, it should predict a person's either functioning or behavior. So a good test can predict that behavior. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you guys about a couple of different tests here. And to really get a lot out of this lecture, I'm going to ask you to pause this video during certain parts. And I want you to kind of think about some things, okay? So don't just skip ahead. I do want you to actually try these tests out. So the first test we're going to test is called a projective test. And this is essentially, it's you interpreting some ambiguous image. And psychoanalysts love to test your unconscious motives, your conflicts, your defenses, and your personality traits with these particular types of tests. So the one that I'm going to show you, a very, very common image, you might actually have seen this before. What I want you to do is I want you to pause the video, and I want you to write down what you see with the first thing that you see in this particular image. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so what you see here can give a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist an idea of what's kind of going on. So for example, a person might say, oh, well, I see two gnomes high-fiving, or I see two bears high-fiving, or I see blood everywhere. I see a butterfly. Depending on what you see could give an idea of some of your unconscious motives. If you see a lot of aggression and a lot of anger, maybe you're angry at something. If you see two bears high-fiving, maybe you just want to have a good time, and and that sort of thing. And so being able to kind of interpret these tests, this is kind of an interesting projective test. Now this is from the Rorschach ink blot test, and so these were essentially developed by a Swiss psychiatrist called Hermann Rorschach. He developed these in 1921. Now he actually he actually died very young and did not get to see, Rorschach did not get to see how popular his ink blot tests became. But if you Google some more, you can actually get quite a few ink blot images, and you might see these on TV and media where they say, what do you see? And the person describes the same thing every time. Now the next test I want you to look at, so this is kind of seeing, what do you see in the image? It's the first thing you see. This next one, what I want you to do is I want you to give me a story. So write a story down. So this next image here, I want you to pause the video, and I want you to go ahead and just jot down in your notes, what is going on in this image? Okay, so based on what you think is going on here, again, gives us an idea of what's going on in your head. Do you see an older woman and a younger woman? Is the older woman, thinking about her younger self? Is the older woman in the back plotting and trying to talk the younger woman into something dangerous? Do you see a conflict here? Do you see a loving grandmother in the background, or an evil stepmother? Kind of what things do you see? And you can actually get some very interesting things about people's relationships, relationships with family and friends from these kinds of types of projective tests. This next one, I want you to do the same thing. I want you to pause the video, take a moment, and write a story to match this. Now in this image, the question is, are you seeing a conflict? Is the woman holding back the man? Is he angry? Did the woman do something wrong and the man's fed up with her? What is this? Is this a conflict going on here? And what's the story? Again, can tell us quite a bit about what's going on in your mind. And so these two images came from something called the Thematic apperception test, developed by Henry Murray and his colleagues. in 1935. And what this is essentially is, giving a story, creating a story about these particular images. And so in essence, what you end up doing is you project your own motives, your own conflicts, your own personality characteristics. And so Murray was quoted as saying in 1943, before he knows it, he has said things about an invented character that apply to himself, things that he would have been reluctant to confess in response to a direct question. So this is a sneaky way to get at how a person feels and how they're sort of thinking about a particular situation or what's going on in their life. Now, some strengths of the projective tests, obviously, you can get a wealth of qualitative information about the person's functioning. And it can really facilitate psychotherapy and get a person talking. And it can get a person sort of motivated to think about themselves in therapy. Of course, some limitations are people can be influenced by the situation. They can be influenced by their examiner, the behavior of the examiner, if the person is receptive to them. It's extremely subjective. You could, have a rater who's sitting down and rating, scoring the test and saying, I think you're, worried about your relationship with your girlfriend or your boyfriend. And then you sit down with somebody else and tell them the same story and they come up with a completely different diagnosis or completely different idea in scoring. And so because of that, it does not produce consistent results, and it's really terrible at predicting future behavior. It only talks about them, sort of the dimension of their behavior in the moment, and it does not do a very good job of prediction. And we talk about, part of psychological testing is it should predict some element of behavior or dimension of behavior, and this, of course, does not do a good job. So we have three other kinds of tests here. So outside of a projective test, we have these what we refer to as self-report inventories. So we have the MMPI, the CPI, and the 16PF, which we kind of talked about briefly before. And so these are sort of sit-down paper and pencil tests that you can get an idea of, how do you rate yourself on all of these dimensions. Now, the interesting thing here, and some of you might have taken personality tests for either a job or at school. And so these kinds of tests are all very similar. They ask you a bunch of questions about how you are and what you think. And so some of them actually use your personality to determine what career you should go in. And the problem with these is they tend to not be extremely reliable. And they tend to be not consistent if you take it from one day to the next. So that's one problem. Now, the good thing about self-report, of course, is they're standardized. They use established norms of people of different ages, and we're able to categorize that based off of age and sex and things like that. Of course, the major weaknesses is, people lie. People will lie, or they have a set way of responding, or they think that they are a certain way and they don't realize they are. And also, some people tend to be pretty inaccurate in how they judge how they behave or how they think they'll behave. But in essence, it's not a great predictor of behavior as well. But the good thing is it is standardized, and that means that people are taking the same test the same way. But there are a lot of problems with this. So the final slide is just a review slide to kind of help you with your studying. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me those questions. And good luck on the quiz, and have a good day.